Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Down the Donut Hole podcast. And in the nervous news today, the Supreme Court, and later on, some life hacks, stuff that we can control somewhat.
And that helps to relieve a little bit of pressure, doesn't it? If you kind of just think of little ways, it doesn't seem like much individually, but collectively, those little life hacks add up to a significant savings. I wanted to talk today a little bit about President Trump's approval rating. And it is appearing that all of this hullabaloo about tariffs and reciprocal tariffs and another tariff and another reciprocal tariff, that it's really spooking the people to the point where the old faithful crowd that has supported Trump, implicitly since he went into office, they're beginning to step back a little bit and question these economic decisions. I mean, even yesterday I saw even Elon Musk, who's been very devoted and very helpful to Trump in achieving his objectives. He's even saying, wait a minute on this tariff thing. And other experts are saying the same thing. And so now President Trump, who had well over 50% approval rating previously, since the beginning of April, since that first week of April, his rating has since slipped. And one report says it's down around 47% now. And another, I will say, among Republicans, he still is enjoying a very high favorability rating. And a lot of Republicans think that he's right on target with his, his agenda and the kinds of things that he's carrying out. And 42% of the public approve of Trump's job performance compared to 45% just a couple of weeks ago. This is a different poll. And then when asked about the general direction of the country, only 22% of those polled felt things were heading in the right direction, while, and this is a big number, 61% felt they are off on the wrong track. And this is within the first 100 days in office. So,
but his overall approval rating is holding steady. I'm not quite sure how that resolves with the...
No, it's slipping a little bit. Among Republicans, It's still pretty high. But I think most people are beginning to reckon with the fact that it won't matter what your party affiliation is if the economy tanks to a recession. You're going to feel the pain, same as all of those people on the other side of the aisle. And so maybe it's going to take a common foe or common adversity to bring us back together, because that's been a pattern throughout history. As soon as something big faces a nation or any group of people, even those characterized by a lot of infighting and a lot of lack of consensus about any kind of a thing that's in front of them, that they somehow are able to overcome their their differences and their distinct attitudes about things and get together. So I don't know. This tariff thing, is that even theoretically? And we haven't even felt the bite to any degree yet. So I don't know.
Oh, somebody will take advantage somewhere, I'm sure, just from the news.
Yes.
Like the stock market. That's nuts. How easily it's controlled just by a news report or something.
When I'm watching the evening news or watching any reports about the stock market, I must say I very much admire those people who understand the ins and outs and all of these little triggers and little things that affect how things go and how quickly the market responds. Last week, or maybe it was earlier this week, I don't know, a rumor caused a surge in the stock market. And it was this big spike that you could see. And then after it became clear that it was just a rumor, that Trump wasn't going to back off on the tariff idea, then everything just plummeted. And
so a negative surge.
No, first it was positive because there was a rumor that he was going to back off on it, maybe not do it or do it in a lighter fashion. But as soon as that became clear to the markets that that was false, that he was staying the course of his tariff initiative, then stocks just absolutely plummeted. And when you look at it, you think, oh my goodness, it looked like a needle. It was that sharp. Straight up and then straight down.
The day traders love it so much. Somebody's making money either way it goes. That's doesn't seem right somehow. I don't think there should be such a thing as puts.
No, especially because I know that's abused. If a rumor can cause a spike like that, then a negative rumor could cause stocks to plummet, and then Donald Trump himself says, buy the dip. Buy the dip. And I'm wondering if that isn't a mechanism. It feels like it needs a whole lot more clarity.
He's given out some rich people's inside secrets there, I think.
Well, that's the thing. If you have a lot of money and the price of eggs doesn't matter to you and you can buy the puts, I mean, the suggestion is that it's bringing the price down where it's available to the average person. But is it really? Is it really? I question that. And as far as the stock market goes, it's, do people feel comfortable gambling, especially now? I mean, if you buy the dip, you have to be ready to take at least a short ride on it. And is that something that you want? I don't know. I don't think so. So.
And Elon Musk is all of a sudden re-questioning the tariffs.
Yeah. Yeah, when the best buddy is
because he's losing billions of dollars probably.
That's nothing. That's nothing to him. The pollens are killing you. I'm feeling it too. Oh well, it's a pretty green spring. So, yeah, I think a lot of people are really worried right now, and I mean, that's a duh these days. But the fact that this is heaped on a whole bunch of other things that are causing anxiety. I know that the courts have been looking at the way the immigration roundups have played out with innocent people, people with protected status being deported to El Salvador. The whole concept of illegal aliens from our soil being deported to this notorious prison. I almost have to close my eyes when I see video of that place on the TV because I'm thinking, if our reputation has always been that we treated people fairly and that you had a chance here.
And that human rights meant something.
And now when you see these people caged up so they can't even sit down, Dave.
I know.
They are working together to give each other a break, crowding themselves even more tightly to give people turns to sit down or lie down. That's how tightly they're packed. They're packed literally like sardines in a can. And so why would we choose?
We're the global champion of human rights, and that doesn't seem to be consistent. No. Especially since we're paying. I know they're saying, oh, that's not on American soil, so that's okay, but we're paying for it.
$6 million. Where are we getting that money? Don't we have facilities in this country, or just, if you must deport them back to their own home countries, because they're not from El Salvador, the people that we sent there.
Well, the people in Guantanamo aren't from Cuba either.
No. Why are we doing that? And I'm sure it's not cheap. How about we cut that?
We have to pay Cuba in gold. They don't even trust the...
Really?
Yeah. That's part of the deal. They demanded to be paid in gold coin ever since the beginning of that agreement.
Wow. But, Guantanamo aside, I used to think that was horrific and that the purpose for that was so they could sidestep the regulations for how we treat even prisoners on American soil. And we all know that was the reasoning behind Guantanamo in the first place and that deal. And now this El Salvador thing, I'm thinking these deportees are not from El Salvador. And this is like the worst prison that we have video of. So why would we do that? Now, if this is meant as a deterrent, as a loud visual of what can happen to you if you come to American soil and sneak into the country and we get a hold of you and we will deport you and this is where you're going to go. That's a third-party prison. I'm missing something with that other than just as a monstrous scare tactic. And I understand a lot of people are thinking that the immigrants are taking American jobs, but it has been absolutely irrefutably shown that they are not, that the jobs that illegals usually take are jobs that native-born citizens do not want. They're low-paying jobs, they're tedious jobs, they're back-breaking work. And so when we have these whole-scale roundups, a lot of businesses, it's been historically, you kind of look the other way and take advantage of the inexpensive labor force, and it's not a big issue. If someone really wants one of those jobs and will work it the way the immigrant populations do, the unauthorized immigrant populations do, then so be it. I'm sure you can get a job if you prove yourself worthy. I would say that now, down in the state of Florida, and I can't speak to other states, but I would expect that this will follow. They're looking at relaxing the child labor laws. Now think about that. Why would all of a sudden relaxing the child labor laws become a thing? And it strikes me that they're looking to fill the gap with somebody that'll work for cheap and do hard work. So now they're pushing back on the regulations that say that children under 18 cannot work overnight shifts. They had limits on how many hours per week they could work and whether they could work day shifts, because we used to want the kids in school. But now I think it's finally dawned on them that these jobs that the unauthorized immigrants used to do quietly and flying under the radar, that now, oh boy, who's going to do this sloppy, horrible, hard work for cheap? Exactly.
Makes no sense, really. It's against the usual idea, I think. And in the state of Florida, too, they have, even people on the Republican side of things have been in support of having a reasonable and legal immigration because their construction trade is in crisis, basically. They can't find people to do these jobs, and the immigrants are more than happy to be trained and paid less.
Well, I've always seen like the road crews putting down the asphalt down here in Florida, especially. We're looking at 100 degrees outside, and there they are out there working on that road. And every time I go by, all I can do is say a prayer for them, because I wouldn't last 5 minutes doing that job, nor would I want to even think about what it would feel like to do that job. And yet there they are, day after day, breathing in those fumes. And to me, they are heroes. Whoever does that work, whoever does those god-awful chores and does them as cheerfully as they can and in a reasonable way that allows the economy to function, they are heroes. And I wonder, Dave, about how does a person have to feel about themselves if they're guilty of isms? And by isms, I mean racism, sexism, all the other isms, sexism,
They don't think about it in that way. That's the problem. Nobody's really putting the thought to it,
Well, you must feel like you are lower than low on the inside. You might strut around and, peacock around like you're, like the most wonderful thing that ever was. But on the inside, you can't be feeling that about yourself if you're threatened by a person of a different ethnicity than you or a different gender than you, and you're worried that you're going to lose your top dog position.
Yeah, it comes from a low self-image, but they don't. It's not cognizant in their own mind.
They don't come off that way. They come off very sure of themselves, brash a lot of the time. The things that they say are unfeeling and unempathetic. But I wonder, you must feel really bad about yourself if you are this threatened by people. Because when you're rounding up people from their little jobs, at a food truck or, a janitorial service in an office building or road crews or, rounding up kids from colleges, and you're rounding up scientists from other areas of the world who went through the process to get a visa to come here to study, and they say something that you find threatening and off you go. It's extremely worrisome.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a lot of stories, too, that are really kind of shocking. And this is not recently. This is many years ago. Stories like a town that was completely killed by the immigrants being rounded up that were working in a factory for real cheap, which allowed this, whatever they were producing there, allowed them to be competitive in the market on the prices and that sort of thing. And so they were quite successful. And then around the factory sprung up in this small town that was nothing before. A general store and, gas station, barbershops, the whole thing that were dependent upon the people who lived and worked there. And then after they rounded up the immigrants from the factory and pulled them out, sent them back, the town just died because there was nobody there, to support the businesses that were run by local people.
Right. And nobody doing the work at the factory. So it's very short term. I think the solution to that is down at the borders. There need to be more lanes opened up. Let's see your paperwork. Who are you? And nowadays, with all of these countries, and certainly Mr. Musk could probably do it in an afternoon or by the end of the week, to dovetail computer systems so that these countries where people are coming from, if you could prove their birth certificates were authentic and that they had no criminal record and that their life situation was such that they felt they had to flee, that can be documented with news reports, and hospital reports, things like that. He's good at it. Put him to work on that. Open up some more bays. Let's vet these people. Get them in here. And everybody, there's plenty of work to go around. The infrastructure in this country needs an overhaul, and we need manpower. And capable manpower, lady power, women power, not kid power. Send them to school. And that's the reason that schools opened up in the beginning. If you remember, if we look backwards, child labor was used in the beginning of this country during the Industrial Revolution.
And they weren't getting educated.
No, and they wanted jobs for the head of households. And so they passed laws to send the kids to school. And that was to keep those jobs open. Now they think that they can robotize all these menial tasks. But unless you have fleets and fleets and fleets of robots ready to roll out tomorrow, then that's going to be a ways off. And so packing off the people that are doing those jobs and doing them well. And, there's people that are up to no good and doing bad things. And they need to be individually, rounded up, ostracized, and then sent back to their home country, not to some horrible prison guilty of human rights violations.
And you said that the Supreme Court is upholding that then.
Yeah.
So does that mean indirectly then that they are declaring war, or that they're
No.
saying that we are at war indeed, because that's what is required to invoke the Alien Enemies Act.
Well, here's a twist on that. Apparently, President Trump has tried to declare a lot of these gangs from various countries, where most of the immigrants to the United States are coming from. He's tried to declare them all terrorist organizations, and that this is a war on terror specifically.
Is that the position then?
Groups.
Is that they're saying that these groups are actually we're at war with them? That's a good thing, right? If we really were, because that's what I've always said. You can really solve the border problem. None of these people want to leave their homes where they grew up and their family is and all that sort of thing. They have to because of these murderous gangs running around and with guns and things, which they're getting from the U.S. Now look it up. It seems like the smarter thing to do would be to send some security forces down from the military and, certainly discourage that activity, and the people will stay in their homes. Why hasn't that been tried before?
In the last couple of days, I think the court, I don't know if it was the Supreme Court or one of the lower courts, ruled that President Trump's idea of sending drones where these gangs are most active, sending drones to those places to counterattack them, which, that's a radical solution. That was nixed. They said, no, we can't do that because this isn't that kind of a war. Drone activity, any sort of bombings, anything like that has to be in direct response or from a defensive position. And we haven't gone through all the steps necessary through Congress, et cetera, to make that declaration stick, to make it be real and fit the regulations.
What's different about Yemen then?
That was my question. Exactly. I was thinking that. We only have a 3% stake in the shipping through there. So, and because of our stance with NATO, if we're saying, well, we're pulling out of Ukraine, we're not sending money here or there, we're not sharing intelligence and all of this other stuff, then why are we making an exception for Yemen? I don't get it.
Yeah, the focus was on the security breach with the texting on the phones and not actually what was happening.
No, and the other thing that made me kind of upset about all of that is when you saw the people that were included on that call, all of them were Republicans. There was not a single Democratic representative on there. And if you're committing the U.S. military to any kind of an engagement, it seems, and I believe it is the case, that both sides need to be in concurrence about that, because we can't have that unilateral deployments. That's scary. We're getting into some real dangerous territory with some of the behaviors, and certainly in terms of the Supreme Court, it would seem like the lower courts, and we're seeing it with those deportations of the Venezuelans, that judge who told the administration to turn those planes around, and they basically just carried on and said, hey, you have no jurisdiction here. And that's what they're banking on, certainly in El Salvador, for how these people are being treated. And again, we've talked about it before, with no due process. Then
did you happen to see what the vote was in the Supreme Court? Was it close?
It was 5-4.
And that went along party lines, I'm sure.
That went along party lines. That's right. The idea of packing the court, quote, unquote.
Don't get me started on that.
That is how, are we not supposed to be able to stand in front of a court and feel like we have some prayer of fairness? And when you're tossing around phrases all the time of packing the court and, trying to decide who's going to get on that court, as far as I knew, your job was to study the Constitution. What does the Constitution say? Not what does your rabbi, pastor, or priest tell you. And your job was to interpret what the law says, not
That's
what
exactly
you think.
right. I mean, that's the thing that really gets me torqued up is why is the highest court in the country the only one that's okay for them to show bias?
And here's the thing, Dave, and this was on my list of stuff to talk about today. I know recently Amy Coney Barrett, and I'll give her lots of kudos because I think she has voted a few times now, not with, her party or the party that brung her to the dance. And she has recused herself on a case, maybe more, that she said it would look like I had bias because I have a connection to this. She clearly laid out why she felt she should recuse herself, and then she moved forward. Other ones on the court continued to sit there, refused to recuse themselves when they are ruling on something where they're friends or some close associate, somebody who's given them gifts, taking them on holidays. They spend time on the yachts and, buying them houses, refurbishing houses. All of this absolutely crazy stuff that if this is your buddy and you're sipping martinis and getting a suntan on somebody's yacht in a court case that's going to benefit them if you rule favorably, you recuse yourself. Stand down. It's
well, they
not
really should
right.
recuse themselves from anything that has political bias, too.
Yeah.
But, they don't. They don't.
They don't. And you know what else? They don't even have to declare anything that would potentially influence their decisions. They don't have to declare it. There's no transparency. There is for the lower courts, but not for the Supreme Court. And they're sitting there for life.
Well, literally, they don't need to do anything.
No.
Their job description is nothing other than one thing. There's one thing one job they must do, and that's to come up with a description of what standing means in terms of lawsuits. That's the only thing the only job that they must do. Everything else is completely at their own discretion.
Describe standing.
Well, in theory, at least, that means that just anybody can't bring a lawsuit against anybody else unless they have some standing. They have some skin in the game, so to speak. They have to be able to show that they've suffered some loss or injury in some way,
Financial or otherwise?
Exactly. Yeah.
How about these cases where one of the quick cup noodle places, and I'm saying cup noodle if it's a brand, I'm sorry, I just mean it in a generic way, that it didn't take 2 minutes to cook the instant noodles. It took 3.5, almost 4 minutes. And they bring a lawsuit to the court for misleading.
Well, that's where the standing rule does usually work out, because they'll say you don't have standing for this.
Yeah, but they've heard a lot of those things, and some things that have suggested that pasta was made in Italy and imported. It suggests that. It might not have said imported. Italian noodles. And what they mean is Italian style noodles or pasta or whatever it was. And that goes to court. And are you thinking
That's the thing.
It's just a cheap way to try to get paid out or have them settle, isn't it?
And then there's this huge problem with having the court dockets be so full, and there are just so many cases and this and the other thing. What I'm thinking, why don't you have somebody apply the standing rule before you actually accept this case, to be filed? And then you'd say, no, wait a minute, this doesn't have standing, so no, we're not going to file this. But no, they take any sort of ridiculous lawsuit and put it on the docket, and that's why it's so choked, in my opinion.
But what we're talking about there is usually through the lower courts. And the lower courts do have a much higher standard than the Supreme Court does for listing your potential biases or connections with.
Well, that's the thing. Any given person who really doesn't have the time or the ability in their practical life to sit on a jury, and they show up, as a good citizen and sort of thing, and they're put through a fairly rigorous line of questioning to see if they have any bias, but that doesn't work anywhere else.
No, and that doesn't work with the Supreme Court. So now it is time, because we need the Supreme Court for guardrails to safeguard the Constitution and our three-department type of government, so that no one branch can get so far out of line that the country itself will take harm, that democracy, which we stand for, will take harm. And so it's time for Congress to pass very strict regulations for self-reporting, and also to institute an independent review process, so that when a case comes up, it can be quickly understood who is who in that, and what are the connections between these players, whether it's a corporation and one of the judges has stock, or they're getting all of these perks from some high-ranking member or the ownership of that corporation. We need to know that. We need to know that from the lower courts, and frankly, there's a better job with that. We also need to establish guidelines for when a court ruling comes down that we don't like, that a member of, any of the government bodies don't like, that they just, they can profess their dismay, their disapproval, their dissatisfaction and disappointment, but they can't call, foul on it. I know lately President Trump has been calling certainly the judge that ruled against the deportation of the Venezuelans to El Salvador. He said he's an activist judge, and he's claimed that any judge that rules against him is a woke judge or an activist judge or a Biden judge, or that they're part of a weaponized judicial system that's specifically against him. And I think that if it's gone against you, you have to think that the juries in those cases saw the evidence and they didn't rule for you because it was against what the Constitution recommends in those situations. And to be calling names and calling for, the removal of judges because you don't like the decision. And I will give John Roberts of the Supreme Court kudos for standing up and saying, no, you use the appeal process, and then you can test it again and see what happens. But when you see that the Supreme Court can take, I'm not going to say bribes, I'm not going to say kickbacks, but that they can have perks from the players, plaintiffs, and defendants, depending, then by the time it gets to the Supreme Court and all bets are off, and there's no way of determining whether there's, coalition among the litigants, what are we supposed to do with that as the public? It just doesn't give you a peaceful, easy feeling like you will be treated fairly. And so if that's the last guardrail, the last test, and the judges are
from
not...
which there is no appeal.
There is no appeal. And they are... We have to take them at their word. They self-report. There's no mechanism to fact check what they're telling you. Oh, hey, you know what? I don't have anything to do with this person when they spent last summer at their compound in the, in paradise. And so we need to look at that. Congress needs to get on that. The public needs that to happen because we need to rebuild our faith in our government. That's part of the reason why Donald Trump was elected, because he has promised to drain the swamp. And I think that the draining of the swamp seems indiscriminate, and the public...
No, it's pretty discriminatory, actually.
Well, okay, indiscriminate in that we seem to be making a lot of mistakes and having to backtrack. There are lawsuits that are saying, no, this group of people that you got rid of needs to be reinstated, and here's some people that you deported to the worst prison in the world. You need to get them back. And,
yeah, but again, all that can be overturned by the Supreme Court.
well, they did. They gave the administration, Homeland Security, more time to get the prisoners, the deportees that were mistakenly sent there, back, but they don't have to do it just yet. How does that square with any kind of an American ideal? I can't fathom.
Human rights violation comes to mind.
Well, that's just it, But they're saying, well, you have more time to do it, but you can't deport any more people without due process and without giving them a specific period of time with which they can gather their own evidence of their innocence.
For answer, they call it.
Their answer.
They have the ability to answer.
So the Supreme Court did say that, but they didn't put their foot down, I think, strictly enough. But and there's no recourse now once it gets to the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court was packed, and that's their phrase, not mine, if it was packed by a president, then...
Well, there's your indirect dictator problem.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
But anyway, on a lighter note, we always try to say, what can we, the common people, do about something like that? Maybe not a bunch, but, being willing to serve on the local jury is something.
It is. Also, going to your town hall meetings where you conduct yourself above reproach. You speak with a firm, clear, controlled voice. You state your position. It never gets to violence. Any protest you attend does not get to violence. And again, there's more and more. James Carville is talking the same way that I'm hearing other people talking. He is very concerned that with the present level of anxiety and anger and uncertainty, that the potential for situations getting so out of hand that martial law is called. I think that we're concerned about that, and he's saying the same thing, that this has potential to foment into something we're not going to be able to call back. And so conduct yourself absolutely fastidiously and insist that people with you do. And if it starts getting out of hand, try to be the voice of reason. And if not, get out of there and take as many people, away from, situations that have gotten violent or, out of control where property damage is being done. And understand, too, that if there is a desire to declare a martial law situation to prolong the administration or prevent elections or any other kind of a thing, then those kinds of things can be fomented on purpose. And so you can't allow yourself to be swept along. So we keep that in the back of our mind. We insist, on a high standard of behavior, courtesy, reasonableness, all of that. But in these uncertain times, the way you live, the way you conduct your everyday life is very, very important. And so, yesterday we were talking about some life hacks that work for us and sharing them with you. Maybe some people will find that useful. And it comes down to even just little tiny things. We're with these tariffs going to be applied to all goods from China. Now, for me personally, a lot of the things that I buy that's made in China are like useful things for the kitchen. Little food storage bowls with lids and things like that. A while back, I stopped buying those as a cost-saving measure for our household, and I just reuse jars. I mean, the jars that I don't buy spaghetti sauce anymore, but I have some of those jars. I certainly have some of the canning jars with lids. Those are really good to have, by the way. If you see them at a thrift shop or something like that, go ahead and get them, because you can buy replacement lids, because the lids give out way sooner than the jar does if you take good care of the jar. And they're meant to be reused and washed out, and they hold, I buy the quart size ones mostly. And a tip from me, don't buy the narrow neck ones. Buy the wide mouth jars, because if I make salads or something, I store them in those jars because the footprint is narrower and you're using vertical space in the refrigerator. So that, and as I was saying yesterday, I have a small refrigerator. So using vertical space is better for me than having some broad bowl of macaroni salad in there. If it's in a quart-size jar, or a quart size and a pint, if I have a party or some people over or something, you make a little more. And so that all works out a lot better for me. And then I store little bits and bobs of leftovers in jars that I've taken the labels off, use those. And I found that I can see what's in those jars better than I can in the food service bowls, the ones that you buy from the store. I can see it through a clear jar better. And so I know, okay, I have, some cooked peas or, some other little thing. I can incorporate that in another dish. And
Do you use the disposable mayonnaise jars, for example, or at least a time or two? I know they don't last as long as glass or whatever. But
I store my baking soda in those. I always use a little baking soda in my laundry, and it makes things smell better. With the little washer and dryer, I think it's important to keep that as clean as possible. And so I'll run water through there with some baking soda in there. I do a lot of baking, so I use quite a lot of baking soda. And I dump that out of those boxes because they're always messy. And if I put it in an empty, cleaned out, dried out, I like the plastic jars because I tend to carry those around to do other chores. I just add a little to water. And so, I have that stored in there. I store sugar in old mayo jars. All the baking supplies that I store in that. I store matches in there. I have a little jar. It's a cleaned out plastic peanut butter jar. I have this little short-handled basting brush, and it's always oily. You're never going to get that out of there. So I have two of them, actually. I stick them in that little jar, and I store that in the freezer just to get it out of the way. And because I'm never satisfied with how clean I can get those basting brushes. And so, those are little tips that save work. They're reusing things. I reuse clothes. I mend clothes back like my grandma did. She was always sewing buttons on things, and repairing little tears and things like that. And she was really clever and taught me a few things. I remember one time I showed her my favorite shorts when I was a little kid. Had a corner tear. It's like an L-shaped tear. And she said, I can fix that for you, no bother. She sat down, and here I wasn't going to say anything to her because I thought, that's going to look kind of dumb having this L-shaped stitch there, That's not what she did. She first did that. She repaired it, sewed it up so you couldn't see it, and kind of overcast it underneath. And then she pulled out some embroidery floss and embroidered a little flower over this corner-shaped tear. And so it was like cool. This little daisy. And every time I looked at that daisy, I thought of her. And that daisy to me, now that I'm a grandma, it just makes me smile because it was so clever. And it took something that really a lot of people would have justified just tossing those out because it was in a noticeable spot and all of that. So instead of having a repair be a detractor, it made those shorts even more my favorite. And
that's cool.
It is cool. I remember your mom, she would remake clothes. She made Tara a couple of circle skirts out of a dress that she had that she couldn't fit in anymore.
What's a circle skirt?
It's exactly what it is. It's fabric that you lay down, you cut out a circle. You can, like, if you have a big enough piece of clothing, that you take the side seams out, or maybe you leave one side seam and then you draw a circle in such a way that the skirt, the center of the skirt, you put elastic in there and little girls can wear it.
Oh, okay.
And just remaking things or buying things from the thrift shop, but now it's not as good as it used to be.
Here we go.
No, it's not as good as it used to be. I used to be able to go. I used to be able to get really, really nice.
I did understand your logic about buying clothes at a thrift shop just for the material.
Yeah. Hey, I reupholstered my sofa with old jeans. And actually, I only bought a few pairs because my kids had outgrown them, especially the teenage girls. They're growing so fast. And so we'd keep them around for a while until the youngest one was through those jeans. And then I always saved them because we had cousins and we shared clothes back and forth a lot with all of that. But because there was quite a pile that we'd amassed, I just cut them all up, made them into squares, equal squares. So it wouldn't have worked just to do it like, big sections of pants. But if you take the jeans and you cut them into like quilt squares, which is what I did, and some of the squares I did wrong side out, some of them right side up, so that there were color variations. And I reupholstered the whole sofa with that.
Clever.
It was. And it cost me, I think, I went to the thrift shop, like I say, and what I was doing is I was buying the largest jeans that I could find, bring them home, wash them up, hang them on the line, dry them out, and then cut those up into squares too, so there's uniformity in the way it looks. And I not only did the sofa, but I also we had this big hassock footstool thing. I did that and put a cute little skirt around it, also cut from denim clothing that I got from the thrift shop. And if you're a senior citizen, you can go on Senior Citizen Day, and if you are, sometimes they have bag days. Anyway, we are out of time. I cannot believe it.
Great.
Count your blessings, everybody. We got to get out of here. I have work to do.
People are saying, thank God.
Thank God. Have a great day.